Welcome to the Free Titan. Today I'm going to give a talk on Mars, the planet Mars in astrology, especially as it is incarnate in its mythological counterparts in Greek mythology as the god Ares, the god of war, the god of killing, one of the most feared and also hated gods in all of the Greek pantheon. Of all the gods who live on Mount Olympus, Zeus often says things like, of all the gods, you I hate the most. Because his domain, at least in Greek mythology, in our modern day-to-day life, obviously there are many applications of Mars, but as he exists as a god in Greek mythology, as Ares, we can kind of understand his innermost being and his most vital instincts, even though sometimes these instincts and this energy is expressed in more watered down ways, right? Because obviously, most of us are not going to war. But Mars in astrology, before I get into the god Ares and the stories behind him, Mars is the planet of willpower. It's connected to the third chakra behind the stomach, the energy center of fire and of willpower, of determination, of courage, of bravery, of violence, athletics, war. But war is used to explain Mars's nature simply because that is the purest manifestation of masculine willpower, courage, and fire. However, this energy can be applied to almost any endeavor in life. It certainly can be applied to business, even in relationships and matters of the heart, discipline and willpower, determination to see things through, to work out problems. This is largely coming from the third energy center, which is Mars, which is willpower and fire. So its sort of purest expression is in war, and that might be where a soul could develop its qualities to their maximum potential. However, for most people, probably for 99% of people, at least in the modern world, we are not using this energy center of fire for war. And there are obviously many applications for it. In any endeavor in life where we have to exert ourselves and make an effort of will, especially when we don't want to do something, this is Mars. When you see someone with great willpower who wills himself or wills herself to do things that are very difficult that other people might not want to do, we admire that, especially when we see it as something that's good for us. This willpower can be expressed and applied to eating right, to exercising, to being healthy, to following our principles. Mars isn't necessarily the principle. That would come from somewhere else, but the will to follow what we know is right, the will to do what we know is right, comes from Mars. Now, if your moral compass is broken, if you have no empathy, if you have no moral upbringing, then this willpower is probably not going to be used in a good way because it has no sort of direction. We don't necessarily want Mars behind the steering wheel of our life. Mars should be the engine. Mars should be the power moving our vehicle down the road of life. Something different, love or intelligence or intuition, should be guiding where we want to go in life. But Mars is the motor. Mars is the engine that gets us there. And so you can have all the best intentions in the world, but without this drive to make an idea real, you won't accomplish much. You won't realize your highest potential morally, financially, spiritually, in relationship, in family matters. Like, this willpower is very important in many areas of life. And in the Hindu scripture, the Mahabharata, which is like the equivalent of the Iliad for India, there are 5 brothers, sons of Pandu. And the third one is Arjuna. In India, they would say Arjun, but we'll say Arjuna. And he, as I understand, represents the third energy center, the third chakra, the stomach center of fire. And it's his discipline and willpower, his dedication to the cause, which often sort of animates the story. And his teacher, his guru, Krishna, is guiding him in this battle, because there's a great battle between good and evil. And the side of good in the Mahabharata is very well defined and clear. Unlike in the Iliad. In the Iliad, it's all very ambiguous. But in the Mahabharata, the side of good is very, very obvious. And the leader, in a way, spiritually, of this side is Krishna, who probably many of you have heard of. He's like the Jesus Christ of India. And his disciple is Arjuna. His chief disciple is Arjuna. And many of the most important parts of this epic poem occur when Krishna, this illuminated spiritual figure, is guiding his disciple Arjuna in how to wage war. And it's all very metaphorical for life, but this is kind of the heart of the whole epic. And the heart of this, there's a chapter called the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the Hindu Bible. And it's a very short piece of scripture, but in it, it's this dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna, which is like divine intelligence, spiritual illumination, and Arjuna, which is the will to will one to victory on the path of life, or on the spiritual path in any endeavor. But what we see here is a very clear expression of how willpower is meant to be harnessed to some sort of divine intuition or intelligence or principle. Because in this story, yes, Arjuna is probably the main hero, but he's always asking Krishna for guidance, and Krishna is always telling him where to go and what to do. And this combination of like practical action of Arjuna and like skill in arms, he's considered the greatest archer of his time. This ability to act physically in the world, to realize one's potential and to win at the battle of life, when this will is guided by a divine intelligence or an enlightened being or an enlightened set of spiritual teachings or moral teachings, we see the unlimited potential for human growth and illumination and enlightenment. So this relationship is a great insight into how this third chakra of willpower really needs, in order for it to express itself at its highest potential, it needs to be harnessed to a sort of divine truth or an empathy, something above the stomach, right? Like in yogic teachings, we have chakras, and when you get higher up, you're more likely to be guided to the right decision from a higher energy center, like from the heart or from the centers of intuition. When you're being guided from the lower energy centers, like the center of fire and willpower, or the second energy center, which is often expressed sexually, or the first energy center, whose shadow is greed and avarice and acquisitiveness and trying to sort of accumulate probably more wealth than you need, for example, without necessarily the commensurate dedication to finding happiness in life. These things guide human beings to misery, or to at least to suffering and unhappiness. And at the very least, they lead them to an end that is not their highest potential. And so, but specifically with Mars, because it's the motor of life, it's what animates us in life. It's what gives us the energy and willpower to succeed in anything, whether it's in business or love or in spiritual endeavors. This Mars, it's like the primary thing to understand about it. One is to make it stronger. We do things that we probably don't want to do, but that we recognize are good for us. This is, I think, the best way to do it. And when we're young, a great way to develop this energy center is to, for example, participate in athletics, where you get to a point where your body is exhausted and you simply will yourself on to continue going. And most great athletes have a very strong Mars. They have very strong willpower. Now, is this going to guide you to having high principles in life? Probably not. But if you do, as you get older, find high principles, or you become humbled in life, this willpower will guide you to stick with the difficult and important things that we all go through in life, that we need to experience in order to realize our highest potential. So enough on that, but this is the basic sort of spiritual understanding of Mars as a planet, and how it can be maximized, how we can use it to its fullness. And it's interesting to note that the sun, which is the center of intuition, often associated with what we would call the third eye or the pineal gland, it is in its strongest sign in Aries, which is the purest expression of the Martian fire. And so this connection, this timeless connection between intuition and divine guidance, a center that is beyond even emotional attachments or even sort of like human love, right? Like this third eye intuitive center, it's not even necessarily guided by love. It's guided because love in a way can confuse us sometimes. Sometimes we're in love with the wrong person, or sometimes our heart is guiding us to follow something or someone we love that's not good for us. So love is a great thing to follow, but it can let us down. It can lead us to make wrong decisions. I think many people have been confused in love and probably made some bad decisions because of it. So this wisdom center, this intuitive center, which is sort of above the sort of human emotions and confusions, this is the highest place to be guided from in a sort of simple way of looking at things. And when this is connected to the willpower, our potential in life is really unlimited, because this will also lead us to do the difficult things that will open our heart and help us to develop a good form of love that will lead us closer to our highest potential and our highest joys. So now I'm gonna transition a little bit into the mythological aspect of Mars, and this is gonna get very much into sort of the human experience of our willpower, and how sort of and in many ways how it can be guided and how it can express itself when it's not guided by wisdom and intuition. Because the Greek god Ares, which is the corollary of Mars, and the Romans renamed the Greek god Ares Mars, so the connection is quite obvious historically and mythologically. Many of the myths surrounding Ares are very violent. He's very impulsive. He's a passionate lover. His main lover in Greek mythology is Aphrodite, who is married to another god. So the whole affair, his whole life is adulterous. He's generally speaking considered quite immoral. He doesn't have a high degree of empathy, if any empathy at all exists in him. But he's pure fire. He's pure passion. He's pure rage. He's pure violence. And he's many times unstoppable, although, as we'll get into, he does have an Achilles heel. And so I'm going to read these opening paragraphs from a nice book on mythology I like, on Ares. Ares' domain is not strategy, not distance killing, not sort of thinking and calculating in war. Because when I talk of war, especially nowadays, we think of a lot of people sort of maybe looking at computers sort of, or satellite imagery, sort of tactically thinking about what to do. But this is not Ares. His is the screaming madness born of stark immediacy of killing or being killed, when you can smell the breath and salt sweat of your adversary. Ares is the madness, and he is the most feared and hated of the gods, for there is no one and nothing, save only Father Zeus, who can control his lawlessness. His interest is not in principle, and this is Mars in a vacuum. This is Mars when he is not connected to higher energy centers or intuitive forms of guidance or empathy or love. This is Mars just existing purely as Mars, which is true for almost nobody in the world. A couple people maybe, but this is just zooming in on him and understanding him in his essence in a vacuum. And like this introduction says, only Father Zeus can control his lawlessness, because his direction, his motivating interest in life is not law, it's not principle, it's not morality, it's rage and violence and frenzy. At the same time, there is no god to match him for virility, for only men of courage can be possessed by him, while others shrink and flee. So when human beings in war or in any sort of endeavor in life become so possessed by this mania, this desire to succeed or kill in war or succeed in business, and they just simply will throw caution to the wind, and they will pursue the object of their desire with boundless enthusiasm and even recklessness. They are, we would say, possessed of Ares, this quote unquote divine quality of the god Mars. Golden helmeted, bronze armored, strong fisted Ares launches himself eagerly at every battlefield. And we could here include in every battlefield of life, not just war, business, relationships, everything. And if he is seen by mortal men, it it is as a dark storm hovering over the combatants, and he moves with the muscular menace of a wild boar. He is the war whoop, and his sons are fear and terror, and goat-footed Pan rides by his side to panic those who are destined to be the losers. At Ares' shout, the mountains tremble, the sky darkens, and all creatures run for cover. And literally in mythology, his sons are fear and terror. He has a number of sons, but these are his, we could say, some of his most prominent sons in the sort of mythological literature and stories about him. And so he's pretty one-sided. Mars as Aries is quite one-sided. Now Mars in astrology rules two signs, Aries and Scorpio. Now Scorpio is more strategic. Scorpio is like, they call it a scorpion, but I think it's actually better understood as a snake because it's deadly, but it doesn't seek open conflict necessarily. It's very strategic. It wants to go into conflict when its victory is already guaranteed, when it already knows it's going to win. Aries is not thinking even about winning or losing. He's simply thinking about destruction and death, and winning. But he can lose. He can be overcome. But Aries before war he's not going to hold back because the odds are against him. Let's say that. And that is his courage. Scorpio in a way doesn't exemplify this reckless courage because it's very calculating. Even though it can be physically strong and dynamic in a militaristic sense, it's very calculating. So it's more shy. Like many snakes are quite shy, right? Like they'll run away from you and they'll coil up. And then at the last minute, they'll strike and inject a lethal dose of venom in your blood. So this is not Aries, right? Like in astrology, Aries is the ram. And I grew up in Montana, and we have what are called mountain sheep. And the rams, they live up in the mountains, and the rams, the males, they butt heads. They literally run at each other and they butt heads until one of them capitulates. But sometimes they'll knock each other out. Like they're not, like we don't watch these conflicts and think, wow, what a high degree of intelligence these male rams are sort of manifesting or showing us. It's simply this boldness, right? This bold courage to take life head on. But it's not always the best way. It's not always the best path forward. Obviously, it has a high potential because of its strength and its virility and its willpower. But these rams also show us its limitation, right? It's very linear. It's very linear. It just likes to lower its head and charge. And so Scorpio can be kind of in a way, the Achilles heel of Aries, because Scorpio is calculating. Scorpio is not going to take Aries head on. It's going to come at it in a more feminine, subtle way. And then it will, if it's trying to destroy Aries, it will strike when it knows Aries is very vulnerable and can't defend himself. And so in the Iliad, in Greek mythology, Athena is a daughter of Zeus. Now, I don't think Athena necessarily represents the sign of Scorpio, but in the sense that she represents strategy and she's more cautious and she's more calculating, there is a certain resonance there. And she's also a goddess of war. She's always wielding a spear and a sword. So there's a strong connection to Mars with the goddess Athena, although she exemplifies and embodies a very high degree of principle and wisdom, which is not resonant with Mars proper. So she's tempered by more influences, and yet there is a part of her which is resonant with the sign of Scorpio. And it's interesting because in the Iliad, in the 5th book of the Iliad, Ares is raging over the Greek troops. And Hera is complaining to her husband Zeus about this. And long story short, Zeus says, well, let Athena go deal with Ares because she has the most success against him of all the gods. And she guides the Greek hero Diomedes to actually plunge his spear into Ares' guts, which is the only instance I know of Ares being overcome in war in Greek mythology. There might be others, but this is a very rare case of it. And now, in the Iliad, Diomedes is the one who is wielding the spear, which wounds Ares, but Pallas Athena is guiding the spear. And so it's really her hand which is overcoming Ares. And so I'll read to you from the Iliad. this is talking about Diomedes. As soon as they were at close quarters, he let fly with his bronze spear over the reins and yoke, thinking to take, this is Ares, thinking to take Diomedes' life. But Athena caught the spear, which Ares threw, in her hand, and made it fly harmlessly over the chariot. Diomedes then threw, and Pallas Athena drove the spear into the pit of Ares' stomach. Interesting, because in astrology, Mars is in the pit of the stomach, or at least behind the stomach. We would say it's in the spine, but vertically, it's exactly on the level of the stomach. And so he's wounded in his own power. Into the pit of Ares' stomach, where his undergirdle went round him. There Diomedes wounded him, tearing his fair flesh, and then drawing his spear out again. And here, this is a nice little testament to Ares' power and ferocity and his terror. Then Homer writes, Ares roared as loudly as 9,000 or 10,000 men in the thick of a fight, and the Achaeans and Trojans were struck with panic, so terrible was the cry he raised. So even in his weakness, even in his moment of debility, his cry is as loud as 8,000 or 9,000 men, and it strikes fear in the hearts of everyone. And then he goes and complains to Father Zeus that the mortals are wounding him, or it's kind of a lame moment for him in his legacy. But it's very interesting here because he goes to complain to his father Zeus, and Zeus says, here Homer writes, Zeus looked angrily at Ares and said, do not come whining here, sir, facing both ways. Kind of an underhanded insult there at Ares. I hate you the worst of all the gods in Olympus, for you are ever fighting and making mischief. You have the intolerable and stubborn spirit of your mother Hera. It is all I can do to manage her, and it is her doing that you are now in this plight. And then he goes on to say that, well, because you're a son, I will listen to you. But it's getting back to that introduction I read about Ares, which is that he's the most feared and also the most hated of all the gods, because he's not sensitive to other people's realities. And when you meet people like the sort of jock archetype, the high school jock, it's a good modern example of Ares and Mars' insensitivity to other people. And his instinct is simply to conquer and destroy and be dominant and subjugate others to his power, which is obviously a good recipe for being well hated, which is exactly in tune with the archetype of the high school jock or bully. And you could say this about sort of the bully archetype on the battlefield or of the warriors. You know, they can have this persona about them, which can be quite insensitive in their power. But yet Athena via Diomedes wounds him. And to me, this gets to the shadow of Ares, which is especially the sign of Ares, which is the fire sign of the planet Mars, which is this like, it's excessively linear, it's excessively bold and courageous, it's not calculating enough, it's not cautious enough. And so when some entity which is more strategic and patient, like Pallas Athena, is guiding the fight against an entity that's very in tune with Ares, he can find his demise. And so it's more than just Athena, it's more than just Ares gets wounded in the stomach. It's like, well, what is the power behind his wound? It's something very strategic. And so to me, this is one of the weaknesses of Mars, which is when it's not strategic, even in its martial power, it can be overcome. And if it's too sort of like calculating, too timid, too eager to avoid head-on conflict, then he can come off as being kind of weak or cowardly. Like he's always in the Scorpio aspect. It can be I'm too addicted to finding my power in the shadows, in manipulations, in going into in being patient and plotting plans. And then he can be disliked for that, right? Because he can come off as being like too cowardly and just opportunistic is a better word for it. Opportunistic and not bold enough, not courageous enough. So in either extreme, in the Aries or the Scorpio extreme, Mars can be quite despicable. But when guided by, now Mars in astrology is in his exaltation in Capricorn, which is a sign of Saturn. Now Capricorn is the most hardworking. It can be very persistent. And Capricorn also is a sign of wisdom, because Saturn as a planet represents patience and wisdom, and it's slow. It sees success by taking one's time and making an effort every day, moving towards the goal. So when Mars has that behind it, that helps him a lot as well. The sort of patience and wisdom of Saturn makes him much better. And then when he has that and is guided by principle, then he's great. But obviously to reach that peak, he needs Saturn, he needs the sun, he needs love, he needs Venus. And so, and bringing Venus into it, love is very important for Mars. And Mars loves love in the sense that he's very virile and passionate, and he's a good lover. But without a sort of more selfless love, he's also not going to be really guided by love. He's going to be guided by lust and passion, which is not going to help him reach his potential either. So there has to be some kind of combination of these planets to help Mars reach his potential. And in Greek mythology, Aries is very much infatuated with Aphrodite, and they are enduring lovers. But it's not a healthy love. It's not like a selfless love where there's a lot of self-sacrifice. It's more of a self-serving love. It's a very sexual love. It's an obsessive kind of infatuating love, in which they're using each other for pleasure and passion. So, but this sort of represents what the reason I like mythology is that it shows where society is, not where it should be. So like in a Christian context, we look at Jesus Christ and we say, oh, that's how we all should be. But what I like about Greek mythology, whether or not you believe the gods are real, it's that it's a reflection of the collective consciousness of the civilization which produced it. So in Greece, the archetype of Mars and Venus is kind of showing an unhealthy Mars and Venus. It's showing an unhealthy impulsiveness towards passion and lust. But that's probably where the Greeks were with it. And so it shows us where they are. And I think as a society and as a civilization, we're much closer to a relationship with Mars and Venus, which is expressed through Greek mythology, than we are through this sort of divine love that we might find in Christian teachings. So I think the two systems combine quite well, because by studying Greek mythology, we can really understand where we are at as a society and where our ancestors are at, what our inheritance is spiritually, what we have to work out of, what we have to overcome. And then the Christian teachings, in a Western context, will show us where we're trying to get to. Like we read stories about prophets or about Christ himself, and we say, well, this is the ideal of love, even though in the New Testament, Christ doesn't have any sort of romantic relationship. We can imagine what kind of man he would be in a marriage or in a relationship. It's not hard to imagine that. He would be selfless. He would be probably forgiving. Obviously, if he was with a woman, she would be an incredibly divine being as well. But it's not hard to imagine what that would be like. Now, in the Old Testament, we do find examples of love, like with Abraham. But again, we're looking at prophets in the Bible, and it's hard to live up to that sort of level of love or of willpower. So by studying Greek mythology, I think we can understand ourselves better. And by studying the Bible or other scripture, we can understand where we're supposed to be. But I think understanding where we're starting from helps us get there, because if we're all trying to get to the same mountaintop, but we're coming at it from different sides of the mountain, we have to strategically chart a course which is unique to our own starting point and where we're at. So when we read these myths, we're going to resonate with different myths in a different way. Like I will resonate with certain myths and they will reflect my consciousness back at me. Someone who's very much a Venusian archetype or a Mercurial archetype or a Jupiterian archetype will read myths about Hermes or Aphrodite or Zeus, and certain myths will resonate, and there's certain lessons, moral lessons or human lessons in there for us to reflect on. But if nothing else, it shows us where we are and what the consequences are of acting out from our current state of consciousness spiritually. And I think reflecting on where we're at is equally important to meditating on where we want to go and where we want to end up. So I think with astrology and mythology, we're not necessarily seeing a picture of who we will be when we're perfectly enlightened and one with God, but we are seeing a really clear map of where we are at. And from that point, when we're very real and we have a great deal of self-awareness about where we are at with our light and our shadow, which is so important in so many ways, then we can look at a really high teaching like Christianity and say, okay, that's where I want to get, but this is where I'm at. I'm still a child of God. I'm not evil because I have darkness. This is just me being real. This is where I'm at. And for me to get to where I want to be, I have to do certain things, and I have to not be so consumed with shame that I'm frozen and petrified. I just say, no, these are my weaknesses, these are my strengths, in a very calm way, not judgmental, not sort of self-flagellating, not beating oneself up. And then we say, okay, that's where I want to go. And we can calmly sort of chart a course there and realize it's going to take a long time to get there. And along the way, every step of the way till we get to the top of the mountain, we're going to be imperfect. Until we get to the top of the mountain, until we're Christ-like, every step of the way is going to be very human and very imperfect. And we've got to be okay with that. And it's a long journey. And I think, especially in the West, because we are so Christian, and I think this is a good thing. I think it's a very good thing that we're Christian. But I think the problem with Christianity, as it's been sort of taught to us through the church, is that we tend to beat ourselves up for who we are. And when we look at these pagan teachings, whether it's astrology or Greek mythology, we can start to say, it's okay where I'm at. Even the gods make mistakes. Even the gods fall down and in really bad ways make terrible mistakes. So it's okay that I am where I'm at. Just thinking that I shouldn't be where I am, or thinking I'm a sinner, or thinking I'm terrible because of my lust or my greed or whatever ails me, is not going to help. We just simply need to, with a clear eyes and a still heart, if possible, say, this is who I am, that's where I want to go. And again, I think astrology and mythology are great tools to help us understand ourselves as we exist now.